History of the Ishanni Sampradaya. In Mylapore, near modern Madras, the Apostle Thomas was pierced with a lance on December 19th, 72 AD, but he did not die until December 21st. He was buried nearby, and the earth from his tomb worked many miracles. In 1292, Marco Polo visited his tomb and took some of the red-colored earth from there. Upon his return to Venice, he healed many people with it, according to his own testimony. The spiritual family of Saint Thomas continued and grew. Just before his martyrdom, King Maesa said to him, I have not been in haste to destroy thee, but have had patience with thee, and thou hast added to thy deeds, and thy sorceries are spoken of through the whole country. But I will do unto thee, so that they accompany thee and go along with thee, and our country shall be relieved of them. To this St. Thomas answered, These sorcerers, which thou sayest shall accompany me, should never fall from this place. And so it has been said to be seen. The Ishanni Sampradaya spread throughout India, though never of large numbers. It is remarkable that historical records indicate that there was no region of India in which the Ishannis were not represented, though they were mostly in South India. In 1430, Nicholas de Kandy, in writing of his travels in India, said that Ishannis are scattered over India like the Jews with us. Except for the vicissitudes that all societies endure, the Ishannis lived in complete peace, enjoying spiritual interchange with various Eastern churches throughout, jealously maintaining their autonomy and distinctive ways. More than one unsuccessful attempt was made in the early centuries by the Mediterranean Christians to establish their form of Christianity in India. At the coming of the Europeans in large numbers, however, this began to change, culminating in a full-scale persecution by the Portuguese colonists who first came to India in 1498. Christians from Europe were always received in total friendship by the Christians of St. Thomas and often given places to live. In many instances, the Ishannis intercede with the local rulers in gaining residency and trade permissions for the Europeans. But sadly, on the part of the opportunist Europeans, there was no such sincere openness, and as soon as any political ascendancy was attained, pressure would be brought to bear on the Ishannis to convert to the Christianity of the Westerners. This came to an appalling climax in the last year of the 16th century when the Portuguese Roman Catholic Archbishop of Goa, Alexis Menzies, summoned all the Ishanni clergy and a considerable number of laymen to the town of Damper to supposedly bring peace and reconciliation between the two churches. In response, 153 priests and about 660 laymen attended. The Ishannis were asked to bring all their liturgy and theosophical texts, especially their ancient texts containing the teachings of St. Thomas, so they could be examined. Believing that the Europeans wanted to sincerely discover the apocalyptic traditions of St. Thomas, and therefore of Jesus, they did so. Their charging could not be disguised when they found themselves surrounded by Portuguese soldiers who forced them at gunpoint to surrender their precious manuscripts, which were then burned in their presence at the order of the Archbishop. Because this is not possible to write a complete history of the Christians in southwest India, because the ancient documents of the church was destroyed by fire at the Synod at Damper in 1599. What history will not willingly forgive is the literacy holocaust which was carried out on the authority of this decree, when all books that could be laid hands on were consumed to the flames. It was comparable in many ways with the vandalism of Omar, who by similar wanton destruction ordered the noble library of Alexander to be consumed by flames. The Syrian Christians of today believe that because of this cruel decree, no records are available with them to recover and establish beyond all dispute their past church history. None will deny that there is substance in this belief. Among the books burned were many copies of three books. Two of them, the Book of Charms and the Ring of Solomons, were on Christian magic. The third was a book on esoteric healing and the making of omelets from gems and herbs, as the Essenes have also done, calling the medicine of the Persians. They now exist only as nearly forgotten names. Not only were their books brought to Damper, destroyed, Archbishop Bensis went from church to church, searching for bad books and burning entire libraries in many places, even in areas where the Portuguese had no political power whatsoever. The liturgical text contained rites of the Chaldean tradition, was especially sought out and destroyed, and because they revealed how utterly the other churches had departed from the original ways of Christianity, and because they expressed the correct view as Isha as the son of God by attainment, and not as the creator God incarnate as the Mediterranean Christians held. A list of forbidden books was made at Damper, and any who read or listened to them being read were condemned out of hand. Over the course of the next days, the Archbishop also encouraged in harangues to correct the ways of the Ishannis and bring them into conformity with those of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic See of Rome. The Portuguese even forced the Christians of St. Thomas to change the way they made the sign of the cross, right to the left, to the way the Christians had recently themselves come to do it, left to right. The official act of the synod particularly inveiled against the Ishannis who taught school and made provisions for the religious instructions of the students in their own religions, even keeping the images of Hindu deities in the schools so the students could learn and perform their daily worship. Those who sent their children to schools taught by Hindus, where they too worshiped the deities, were declared excommunicated, and the children were forbidden to enter a church. Since partition and adulterous worship, the makings of offering in Hindi temples were the norm for the Ishannis, since they were Hindis, that too was soundly castigated. Equally denounced was the use of Hindu rites of exorcism by the Ishanni priests, as well as other adulterous and superstitious Vedic rituals. Priests who dared to have themselves registered as Brahmins were condemned, not for religious reasons, because it supposedly made them liable to be called up for military service. St. Thomas had given the Ishannis a book which they used for deviation to attain guidance in the making of important decisions and to determine the future. This was a special target of the Portuguese, who also rallied against the use of Hindu diviners by the Ishannis, and all copies of this invaluable document were consumed to the flames of bigotry. The St. Thomas Christians still use deviation of various sorts. The Shawnees considered astrology a legitimate means of forecasting and guidance and used it accordingly. They were considered to be especially skilled in determining astrological what days and times are the most favorable for marriage and the starting of journeys or any other type of endeavor. In David Daniels' book, The Orthodox Church of India, published and sold by the Orthodox Church in India, we find this. The St. Thomas Christians are accustomed to consult astrologers to ascertain the auspicious moment for setting out for any purpose, for a journey, a wedding, etc. Drawing horoscopes is not uncommon amongst them. Many St. Thomas Christian priests are astrologers. Oddly, condemnation was even pronounced against the Shawnees' laudable customs of adopting as many orphans as they could so they would not be homeless. This was a custom of the Seans also, as it is the Hindu custom to name their children after deities. The Ishannis naturally were accustomed to sometimes name their male children Isha. This, along with the habit of giving Old Testament names as well, was violently censored by the Portuguese. They were also condemned for piercing their ears and taking too many baths. Hardly any of the Shawnees would understand the language in which all this was done, and they were forced through cajolery and threats to sign documents of occurrence with all that had taken place. These documents being represented to them as nothing more than statements that had been present at the gathering. Before sending them to Rome, Archbishop Manzales interpolated many items into the signed documents to make it appear that the Shawnees had agreed to things actually not spoken about or firmly resisted by them when they brought them up. The synod at Damper did have one positive effect, though a backhanded one. By reading the fulminations against the pagan ways of the Shawnees and the official condemnations of them, we are able to establish that the Shawnees were indeed practicing Hindu Brahmas who worshiped Isa, but considered the other segments of Hinduism as well as the other religions of the world to be equally viable in the search for God. Family approved Cyrillic lithical texts were issued to the clergy along with other written directories, and they departed in a daze to their flocks, accompanied by Portuguese assistants who were made to make sure to carry out the demands of the European. And the Jesuits that were present at the Diamper Assembly officially objected to the outrageous actions of Archbishop Menzies. He coolly remarked that he behaved like that just to show the way of salvation to the assembly without hindrance. Cardinal Eugene Tisserand was a period of the same mentality when in 1957 he wrote in Eastern Christianity in India. Instead of destroying the existing Syriac manuscripts, he, Archbishop Menzies, could have had them corrected, but his method was that of certainty, so any future heresy could be more easily averted. This was the beginning of sorrows that were to continue for nearly a century. Slowly the ways of the faith, which were once delivered unto the saints, were eroded through in the rural and mountain areas, not prosperous enough to attract the rapacious attention of the Portuguese clerics and traders. Little changes occurred. Friendly clergy from the Syriac-speaking Orthodox churches who came to visit their Indian brothers were arrested and deported or imprisoned. The fact that these Syrians made no objections to the Ishanni's Hindu character indicates that in earlier centuries they themselves held comparable or compatible ideas, or also considered them neither heretical nor of any spiritual detriment. Some were actually taken to Portugal and Rome and subject to interrogation by the Inquisition. A few were burned to death for heresy. Others vanished forever. Atrocities committed against the Indian Christians was not unknown, though never officially sanctioned by the invaders, a common tactic of tyrants. In 1653, at the order of Portuguese Eclecticalists, a Syrian bishop who had come to find out why communication with the Ishannis had been so long in abeyance was imprisoned. When the Ishannis learned of this outrage, they came in thousands to protest. The bishop was then smuggled out of the prison and eventually murdered. This so exasperated the Ishannis that many thousand of them assembled at a church in Matacheri and swore on the Kunu cross the solemn vow that they would no longer have any association whatsoever with the Portuguese or their patron religion. Happily, this was successful, and the yoke of spiritual bondage was thrown out permanently. Despite skirmishes with the Europeans who were determined to reimpose their enslavement, the Ishannis managed to keep their spiritual integrity protected by the Hindu rulers from further persecution. It is tragically true that unworthy friendship is more treacherous than an enemy, and so it proved to be in 1970 when the Protestant missionaries, mostly Church of England, managed to exert great influence on the Ishannis and bring about the abandonment of many valued traditions and belief. In time, this form of invasion was repulsed to some degree, but not until many had forsaken the ways of their ancestors and embraced the minimal religion of the missionaries. In this way, both Catholic and Protestant European managed to reap undeniable and profound changes of the Santis, Sampradaya. I saw the effect of this for myself when speaking at a church meeting in Iranum where St. Thomas had founded the congregation. Several examples of his woodwork, especially carvings in traditional Hindu temple style, was shown to me. During my talk, I felt so galled by not being able to speak freely of the higher esoteric aspects of religion that I decided to break loose and say what I please and hang the consequences. As far back, many very elderly women, men and women, were sitting, their heads bowed down in abject boredom and disinterest. But when I spoke just a few sentences of real Christian, Hindu, Ishanni belief, they all began looking eager at me, smiling, nodding, and gesturing to another in approval. At the end, they all surged forward to express their appreciation of my talk. It was evident that as children they heard the very things I was now speaking, but had been a long and dreary time since those truths have been publicly expressed. We can confidently say that in reality the Ishanni Sampradaya, in its fidelity to its heritage from the Lord Isha and St. Thomas, was a legitimate segment, Sampradaya, of Vedic religion, Hinduism, vastly different from what is commonly known as Christianity. This is why Cardinal Tisana could uncompromisingly write, "It does not seem, however, that the Indian Christians are ever greatly concerned with the great Christological disputes of bygone days." That was because the doctrine, controversials, alterations, and aberrations of Mediterranean Christianity meant nothing to them as followers of Arya Dhamma, according to the teachers of Isha and St. Thomas. History substantiates this, so a brief look should suffice.